Hello everyone. In this video we're going to talk about wrapper components and how we use them in React.js. So before we look at any code, let's quickly discuss what are wrapper components. Well, according to DigitalOcean, wrapper components are components that surround unknown components and provide a default structure to display the child components. This pattern is useful for creating user interface elements that are used repeatedly throughout a design. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds quite cryptic to me. So I think a better way to demonstrate what this is actually saying is by looking at an example. So let's say we have a form that looks like this on our application. So it could be represented by the following HTML. So it's just a form and a few other bits and pieces inside of it. And if we break down this form, we have ourselves a title there. We have ourselves, the body of the form, which contains all the fields. And then we ultimately have like this footer thing at the bottom, which contains the save button. Now, if we look at where these are in the code, well, we see the following, right? So the yellow denotes the title there, which is the H2. The red talks about the body of the form, which contains a whole set of labels and divs and things of that nature. But the important distinction here is that it's wrapped around a div with a class name of group form body. And then at the very bottom, we have a row that's defined called button row with a button inside of it with the text saying save, right? Now, we have a similar form in the same application. We can see once again, we can see that there's a title, we can see there's a body, and we can see that it's got the same bottom part with the save button, right? So this is probably a good candidate for reusability using wrapper components. Now, let's put the code side by side. So the code on the left is the code from the first example. The code on the right is the code from the second example that we just saw. Now, if we break it down and we look at what the common parts are, you can see that they're illustrated here in the red box. So these are things that we could use or reuse in our application, and we can wrap the unknown part, which is the bit I've just highlighted. So the green on the left and the yellow on the right are bits that could potentially change over time, or they can be changed in different parts of the application. Whereas the first part and the bottom part are very unlikely to change. And the only difference between the two of them is that there's a different title, right? We have H2 with a title of personal details on the left and a title of address for the address one on the right, okay? So this is what we could do. We can actually create wrapper components to map this problem. So I've grabbed the same markup for the personal details on the left here. And if we look at what is on the right, we can see that the first three elements on the left have now been reflected to the one change here on the right. And more so at the bottom, we can see that that last div that was wrapping all those unknown elements in the middle there is part of this group form element, as well as that button row, all right? So this is how we can break down reusability of HTML markup to create wrapper components, all right? Now we could go another step further here. We can see that even inside that unknown space, that we have some common reusability. We can see we have a label, and we can see we have a div with the class name of form field. Now, what goes inside the form field is the unknown part, all right? So you can see on the example on the left, we have a fancy text box in one yellow bit, and then under that, in the second example, it could be a checkbox. Or in the third example, it's also a checkbox, but it could have been a radio button, or it could be a number of things, right? So we see that and we reflect that on the other side by creating another wrapper component called form field. And you can see now form field encapsulates all the stuff from the label to the div with class name for field and the div that actually closes off that form field div. So this is essentially what wrapper components are and how we can use them in our React applications. Now that we understand this, let's see how we can do it in practice. Okay, so what you can see on my screen right now is a screen that kind of represents what we've seen in the slide deck. And it's meant to be a representation of a Twitch dashboard, right? So if you've used Twitch before and you're actually a person who runs live streams on Twitch, you have seen this kind of setup. Now, it's not exactly the same as Twitch, but it's just an example, all right? So I'm on an account screen. You can see I've got some personal details. You can see that structure that we spoke about. So we've got the fields here and then the save button. Then we have the address section and that has fields and then a save button. We also have a settings screen that's a little bit different, but it still has the same structure, a title, some fields, a save button, a title, some fields, and a save button, okay? The difference here is that we've added an extra message for each field in this section right here. Cool. All right, so now that we know what we're looking at, let's have a look at the code. So if I come over to source, and before I get into this actually, the code for this video is in GitHub. I will leave it in the description of this video. So if I come to source and I come to pages, so pages that represent each of these links essentially up here, we've got the account. I'll select the account page, and here is the React component that represents this account page, right? I'll also at the same time open up the settings page, and this represents this screen. Cool. So we'll come back to the account page for a moment, and let's have a look at what we've got here. So we can see that we've got a form up here. That's really marked by this form tag here. So it's this HTML here. Then we've got this secondary form, this form matches this section here, right? My apologies. This form down here, this one here, it matches this second form. Cool. Now, if we remember, we are looking for reusability. So we saw in the slide deck that we do have some reusability here. So this is essentially the same markup as we saw on the slides. So we have a form, a H2, and a div with a group form body on it. Inside of that is the unknown bit, right? So there's our unknown fields, or what we're going to classify as unknown. And we can see it's the same here as well, okay? So the first step we're going to take is to take this markup and create a wrapper component for this called group form. So with that said, I'm going to come over to my file explorer here. I'm going to go into components, and then I'm going to go into this forms folder, and you can see I've created a folder already called group form. You may not see this, but I've already got one. I'm going to come in here and just go group form.js, okay? And I'm just going to export very quickly a very simple React component. So I'll use functional component, and I've got the const keyword. And for now, I'm just going to render anything. So we'll just render a div saying group form. So that's the first step. I'll now also export this. So I'm going to just come to my index file and export it through here. And that's because I love to use index files to organize my code. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I definitely like to do that. And then I'm going to come into my account page, and I'm going to refer to it up the top here as next to fancy text box. I can go group form, all right? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace these 3 lines here, because these 3 lines will be consistent. But before I get to that point, let's just embed it in here and look at what we need to add. So I'm just going to save that. And now we can see over here on the left that we can see the text group form. All right. So we can see that this element is just acting like a regular React element at the moment. Now I want to change this group form up here. Sorry, I'll just take this off screen. I want to take this element and I want to add this markup to it. So I'm going to come to my group form. I'm going to paste. And then I'm also going to grab at the bottom here. So this closing div all the way down to the form. And I'm going to bring that into here and I'm going to paste. And then I'll just reformat a few things like so. And in this situation right here, I'm just going to leave a comment saying this is where the unknown area is, right? Now, why is it here? Well, if we look at the markup, that's where the unknown is. It's these fields right here, okay? So with that said, what we can do now is, as you can see over here, we've got the structure. We can just cut this out. We can pretty much, well, I'll leave it there for the moment. I'll paste the fields in here. And I need to indent this a bit, like so. And if I save, you'll see now we get two personal details with nothing in it, right? Because we've got the old version and we've got the new version. So I'm going to get rid of the old version. And now we have an empty form, right? These fields are not being shown inside the form anymore. Now, why is that? Well, we haven't taken care of the fact that we want to actually inject those children, or that unknown area, this unknown set of fields. We haven't injected that into our group form, okay? So how we do this in React is that every React component has access to something called children, right? And children is always what is inside of your component, right? So in this case, all this stuff is actually defined as children. So if I now come into here and I just say, all right, I'm now going to display my children like so, now you can see the fields will show up, right? So in a sense, we have now wrapped the fields that we have here, which is the unknown part, with the element of group form. And what that really is now is just a form with a h2, and we'll deal with this title in a second. And then the div with group form body and also the save button. So now that we've done that, we can now come down and do the same for the one below, right? So we can go, cool, let's come in and replace all of that with group form. And then we can remove all this here and we can close it off, right? And we can save that. And well, we're almost there, but you can also see that the title is not being changed appropriately, right? And that's because we haven't changed or passed in the title, right? We just hard coded it as personal details. So what was it before? Well, let's take a look. So I'm going to go back a few steps. It was address, right? So the way that we can deal with that is we can actually pass in a title as an attribute, right? So we could say in this situation that we want this to say, what was it, personal details. And then we can say we want this one to say address, right? So if I save that, still nothing changes. But if I come over to group form and now I say I'm going to grab that title that we just added as a prop, like so, and we substitute this section here now with that name. Now we've got ourselves the correct title for each form, all right? Now, that's just for the account page. Obviously, the settings page is still using the old approach. So let's quickly go and fix that. So I'm going to come down to settings page and I'm going to do the same thing here, right? So I'm going to import the group form like so, and I'll close it off and I'll probably create one directly underneath it. And I'll grab the title for each one. So we go title equals notification settings, and then we'll grab the stream settings title as well. So title equals stream settings. I'll save that. I'll come over the settings. You can see that we've got the group set up. We just need to put the content inside it. So we'll grab the content for each one, like so. And we'll make sure it's indented properly. And there we go. And we can delete that because that's the first form that we just changed. And then lastly, we can grab this stuff down here. and we can remove all of this, and we can embed that field stuff into here. And now that we've done that, I can bring these all back and save, and there we go. Okay, so we have used our first wrapper component, which is this group form component. Now, as I mentioned in the slides, we could go another step further here. We could look at the pattern that we have, and before I focus on this screen, let's go back to the account page because it has a little bit more of a structure. So I've got a label. Let me just quickly hide that, make it a little bit easier for you. So we've got a label and a div with a form field, and then we have an unknown element here, right? Now, in the case of this, it's always a fancy text box, but the value is different, right? So we want to control that from outside the wrapper component, and we may want to add extra things into here at some point in the near future. So what we really have here is a label and a div repeated multiple times, right? So this could be another candidate for reusability. So what we'll do is we'll do this. We will create a form field component. So form field, and then I'll include a form field.js file. And what I'll do for this is I'm going to just copy and paste group form, and we'll remove that, and then we'll just put a div saying form field for the second, and we'll go form field, and I'll just remove the props for now. And then I'll export that through my index because it's, as I said, I love index files. You don't have to do this part if you don't want, but I definitely like to do it. So form field, form field, form field, like so. And now if I come to my account page, I can start implementing these form fields. So we go form field, and that would have brought in the form field from the same area here. And I'll just quickly collapse that. All right, so we've got form field. So if I save this right now and come to the account page, you can see there's a form field here that just says first name. And it's kind of not set up right at the moment because we don't have anything inside the form field. It just says form field, right? So let's take our reusability and let's throw it in there, right? So the reusability is this part. So if we grab this, we come to our form field and we go, cool. We're going to return a label, and then we're going to remove our fancy text box. And this is actually going to have children. All right, and this will come from passing in children from up here. And we have an error right now, and the error is because of the fact that we have multiple root nodes, right? So we can get around this easily by using the React's fragment syntax to give us one individual root. All right, so I don't know if you know about that, but that is a way to deal with things being or having multiple first nodes there. So now we're back to this point where we do have something shown in the structure it needs to be shown. Now there's no children at the moment, so we can deal with that by just passing in the fancy text box and pasting it in here. And now you'll see that we've got our text box, all right? So if our wrapper component is working, the only thing we haven't dealt with is the label. So if I repeat this again for the one below, so let's say we grab the fancy text box for this one, but we'll copy and paste this first. All right, if I do this, grab this one, and I paste, and indent, save. Now you can see it says first name multiple times, right? Even though the field text has changed because we got the fancy text box declared here, the label is the same. So kind of like what we did with the form group, we'll pass in a field name attribute. And for this one, we'll call it first name. And for the second one, we'll call it, I think it's last name down here. So we can pass in last name like so. And if I save that right now, it's not going to do anything. But if I come over to the form field and we say, yep, I want to get access to field name, we can replace the hard-coded field name with field name and save. And now you can see that the fields update. Well, the field label here updates. Cool. So now I can go and clean up the rest of this so we can get rid of all of this. And we can create one more form field for this form. And if I save, well, we're back to the form that we had at the very start. Okay. Now I'm just going to quickly do the same for the others down here. So they're all fancy text boxes. So I'll just copy, whoops. Now we can see that we've got exactly the same form we had at the start, but now we're using wrapper components. We're using a group form wrapper component to wrap the unknown fields, and we're using a form field wrapper component to wrap the field name and everything else around the input that we're going to apply here. Okay. Now that's just for the account page. We'll just quickly go through and update the settings page as well. And so if I come over the settings page, well, there's a couple of extra things that we have here. All right. So let's get the main wrapping done first. So if I come in and go form field, well, everything still looks to be good. And then I'll do the same thing for the one below. So we got form field. Cool. And if I now strip all this out, it should look exactly the same. And as you can see, it does. Right? So we've got exactly the same UI that we had before, but now we've got less classes, less DOM and all that stuff to work with. We're just working with wrapper components. Now, there is still on this screen this concept of a form field explanation. And how I see this is this could be actually optional to show underneath, what you put in as children here. We could say for this form field, we may want an explanation, right? So let's go with the approach that we have this set optionally inside of our form field wrapper component. So we could do something like this, right? We could say explanation. And then just before we render the form field, we could do something like this. We could generate our own EL that if there is an explanation passed in, we're going to create a div with a class form field explanation and then pass in that text. Otherwise, we return null. And this can sit directly under children. So that's the important thing with wrapper components, is that you don't need to have only children on its own inside of a div. You can place things directly under where the children would go. So we go explanation EL. And if we save, well, nothing's going to change right now because we're not passing in any explanations. But if I come back to here and we now say, instead of having this div here, we come in and say explanation equals, and we just grab the message that's here, like so. And I need to create that as a bind. There we go. I can now remove this. And when I do that and save, you can see the text is still there, okay? Because it's now being injected via this prop here, which ultimately shows up directly underneath. So if I remove this, you can see that the text is gone, all right? But if I add it back, well, the text is back in again. Cool. So I'm just going to do that for the remainder of these ones. So let's grab the same explanation field and save. And well, we've got exactly the same UI over here now, but as you can see, it's a lot cleaner to read. And we're reusing a lot of the structure and styling. Or are we reusing the styling? We're reusing the structure, but we're not necessarily reusing the styling. The styling we're getting, right, and I'll explain in a minute why we're getting that, but all we've done at the moment is move the structure around, okay? Now let's quickly just check the account page to make sure everything's all good, and it is. So let's now deal with the issue around styling. So how I've done the styling for these components, as you can see, is that I have hard-coded class names, all right? So that means that I have some CSS somewhere that allows me to style these components. Now, because of the nature of how we were using it across the application, I added the styling to the main index.scss file. But now that we're using wrapper components, we can actually move this styling into that component and use it at that step, okay? So what that means is if I cut this out, all right, so we take the form group, for example, we'll take that CSS out and save. Well, we're gonna lose all the behavior and that's fine. But if I say, okay, I now wanna use CSS modules in my wrapper components, I can come up to my component, I can go to my group form, for example, and in the same folder, I'm just gonna add a group form.module.scss, and then I'm gonna paste my CSS in here, okay? Now, if you don't know how modules work, CSS modules work, basically the name of the class is going to change. So if I import that same, so group form.module.scss, and I add it as a style, so import style from this. Now this is common React code for CSS modules, or SCSS modules in this case. We're going to get an error. That shouldn't have happened. I'm just trying to work out why that happened. Yes. The reason why that failed is because I forgot to include the colors. All right, so this actually has access to some variables that I've defined in a colors file. And now that's not working still. Why is that not working? Because this is a different directory now. So source colors. There we go. Okay. So you can see the styling still doesn't work. Okay. Now, because I've moved this into a module.scss file, the naming of this class has changed. And I can show that very quickly by coming into, well, sorry about that. Let's get this in the right spot. So if I come and check the class for one of the forms, so that's the form field. But if I access form, for example, you'll see on the element, the class says form group, okay? But you'll see that there's actually no styling being applied there. Now that's because we use CSS modules, things get renamed to these funky names like this, right? So in order to change that, or to get it to use the proper name that we've just applied to this new form group class, we need to do the following. We need to go into the formgroup.js, and we need to use this style. And instead of hard coding group form, I now just go style.groupform, like so. And when I do this, now that I'll get this back into a state that I care about, like so. And that should be even smaller. Let's just make this a bit smaller. Cool. So now if I do this, you'll see that we get some presentation back. So I just need to do that for the rest of the elements on this form. So I come here and save. And now we're back to what we're used to, right? Because now we've moved all that SCSS and we've used the embedded styles that's part of the module now and named the classes accordingly. So now if we check what's in the DOM, you'll now see when I select a form, you'll now see that group form has been applied with a different class name. Okay, now that's not anything really to do with wrapper components. That's just got to do with the fact that I'm using SCSS modules inside of my React application to kind of keep things in a namespace way for CSS purposes. That's not really the topic of this video, but it's just something as a result of using them has created this issue for me, and will for you too when you follow along, if you choose to follow along with this video. Cool. All right, so I'm just going to do that once again for the form fields. So let's cut this out, save, and now we've broken the form field. That's fine. We're going to come up here. We're going to go form field.module.scss. We're going to paste this in like so. We're going to save. It's still not going to work. We're going to now import that style. So import style from, and we've got form field .module.scss like so. And again, I think I forgot to include colors. Yep. So let's just grab the same import from here and put it at the top here. All right, cool. So we're nearly there. So we've got our styles, just closing a few things down here. And so the last thing I need to do here is just change these class names, right? So this will be style dot form field explanation. We'll put some spacing in between here. And then the last two down here, all right? So we'll just pretty much copy. And if I've done this all correctly now, there we go. So this is the process that you can take to set up wrapper components. Seems like a lot of work up front, but in the long run, I think it's good for your application. So that's it. That's how you can create your own wrapper components using React.js. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell. And I'll see you all next time.